I've finished watching the video, The Young Turks, where Cenk Uygur was interviewing Alex Jones. And there were some things in that interview that I wanted to discuss, because it was interesting looking at their perspective. Alex Jones with the conservative conspiratory position, and Cenk Uygur with the liberal position. And there's just some of the ideas that exchanged between them and the misunderstandings of what I believe the source of these issues actually comes from. One of the things discussed was Alex Jones saying how there's been many things put out by the elite media and whatnot, saying about they want a technocratic society because it would function better and it will do what they want, and that this is inherently a form of dictatorship. Well, I mean, the real question arises, why do they want it? Well, because capitalism is anarchy in production. It just goes all over the place. It's unplanned, and when you do that, you have an unstable system, which is why countries plan their economies. Whether Austrians like to admit it or not, planning is a rational choice, because if you don't, you get horrible messes. This is all about the decline of the global economy since the global economic collapse of capitalism in 2008. It's becoming more and more difficult to sustain the economic world that it is we live in. This is not some kind of socialist conspiracy where they're trying to equalize people all across the entire world. In case you haven't noticed, a lot of these organizations like the IMF and the World Bank have made people poorer, because that's what they were intended to do. There is no idea of a total equalization of all people across the entire world, which is what a socialist would want, is a more equal society. Yet we have clearly been given the opposite with this, and Alex Jones doesn't seem to understand that. One of the ideas expressed by Alex Jones is that he has mentioned how the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers have merged their corporate entities, how they have now, the two families have merged all of their things into one global empire to maintain a monopoly over everything else. The false idea here by Alex Jones is that he's thinking that if it's a monopoly, then it's not capitalism. I mean, this is a false idea that it's a semi-libertarian right-wing position that Alex holds, because in real capitalism, in the completely abstract theory, that doesn't work in real life. Monopolies never happen. He goes on to talk about something called Agenda 21. I'm not entirely familiar with what Agenda 21 is. However, he does describe it as something along the lines of wanting to eliminate the middle class. There's only a super rich and a super poor. That doesn't sound like communism at all to me. That doesn't sound like socialism at all. In fact, that sounds a lot like a severely, drastically increased capitalism. I mean, this is what Marx said was coming, was that capitalism would, the gap between the rich and the poor would expand. And this would actually end up being at a crisis point where there would be a radical reconstitutioning of society based on a class consciousness that arose as a result of this gap in wealth. To actually illustrate this further, Jones gives the metaphor of the Hunger Games, where you have a mostly poor rural population while you have a rich elite sitting in a city enjoying all the benefits of society and getting everything good out of it. In other words, that extreme rich and extreme poor, which he was talking about, which is ironic because a lot of the right-wing people like him screamed that it was socialism, yet it perfectly identifies and gives image to the exact system that it is that these rich elite are trying to do. In other words, make themselves richer and everyone poorer. One of the points Alex Jones brought up was that they keep talking about a one world government where everything is controlled all the time. Now, Cenk has talked about that he does support that to a degree. He supports a stronger UN for getting more control over the world, and what he calls better cooperation between countries. Of course, that's the problem here. Countries are a lot like corporations, which is why a lot of countries are corporations. They compete with each other. They have competing interests. They fight with each other. They both want access to resources. This is why wars happen. The liberalism on Cenk's part is refusing to see how it is the very nature of capitalism that drives itself towards war. Because it has to. On the other conservative end, Alex Jones sees it only as an evil totalitarian government that doesn't have any particular real source, only just an evil conspiracy that is coming up. The real point of the UN is to get the political structure to fit the economic structure, and they will have competing interests. That's the point. The UN is not some real big totalitarian over-control government where, one family rules everything. It's one class rules everything. And he is quite correct when he says that the mass amounts of wealth in the world are getting into a smaller and smaller group of hands. Yes, that's called the concentration of capital. Marx already warned us about that. To further elaborate on this idea, Alex Jones goes on to say how these technocrats hire people with like 170 IQs to come in and try to figure out all these problems. Mainly he refers to Greece, and that a lot of technocrats have been come in to try to fix the situation. Well, there's a reason. It's not necessarily an NWO plot to take over the world. Greece is in a very anti-capitalist state right now because people don't want to pay for the mistakes of the bankers and pay for the decisions that politicians made that they had no hand in deciding. They rightfully so don't want to be a part of these consequences that they never decided upon the actions that caused it. Now, it's about the capitalist class maintaining its position, not just the domestic capitalist class in Greece, but the capitalist class globally who have a vested interest in making sure that no kind of, to use the term, free republic or even socialist republic pops up as a result of this. Now, Jones very specifically goes into saying that these people are like really, really smart people. They have 170 IQs. Well, there's a reason why this is such a big deal for him. This is going on that old premise of demonizing the intellectual class. Now, it's commonly claimed that communists persecuted intellectuals, yet here we see a very clear culture in the United States that spreads fear around intelligent people. They're a totalitarian organization that are going to tell us how to live. Constant claims that they're indoctrinating our children in schools in order to brainwash them into being Marxists. This derives from the same point that Christian fundamentalism does, because quite often these people who scream this are not only Christian, but very, very religious Christian, or even fundamentalist Christian as a result. Not as a result, but it tends to be the same crowd. There's a reason. This can be traced very much right back to the idea that people don't know what's good for them. Only the church can tell you that. It's not a matter of people thinking. Take a look at the Dark Ages, in that human technology and even understanding did not progress during that time, but actually regressed. We had to go back and learn things that we once knew all over again because of the church squashing any ability people had to think for themselves, and they demonized it. This stems from the same place. This is the same cultural demonization of intellectuals. Those were my thoughts on the Alex Jones Young Turks interview. It's open to interpretation because it is an interview between a liberal and a conservative conspiracy theorist. So I leave it up to you. What do you think? Why don't you go ahead, let me know in the comments section below.